Lindsay channel, and today I'm going to be explaining the main chemical reaction that happens in Napa cabbage kimchi, which is fermentation. And the first step that begins the process is brining the cabbage, and I did so by kind of soaking the leaves in water and salting in between each leaf. I then waited for the cabbage to kind of soak in the salt for around 1 to 2 hours, and this part of preparing kimchi is significantly important as the salt acts as a kind of preservative by drawing out water through osmosis, and also later on regulates the fermentation process. Brining removes harmful bacteria and allows for, quote, good bacteria to exist on the cabbage, which will eventually aid in converting the natural sugars on the cabbage into lactic acid. And when I say, quote, good bacteria, I simply mean lactic acid bacteria, which will help the production of lactic acid. I then made the marinade for the kimchi using these ingredients listed above, and I turned the rice flour into paste by kind of mixing it with water and cooking it on the stove until I got a kind of thick, translucent paste. Then I blended the rest of the ingredients together, which you'll see up on the screen for the next minute or so. And while it's playing, I'd like to explain that the marinade also contributes to the fermentation, as some of the ingredients have antimicrobial properties that inhibit any unwanted bacteria growth. And we don't want any bacteria growth because that otherwise might disturb the production of lactic acid. And at this point, the cabbage was brined and ready to be marinated in the sauce. So I rinsed out any excess water from the cabbage, and then I placed the marinade thoroughly through the cabbage leaves, so just kind of like setting it apart and putting it in the leaves. And I repeated this process until all the cabbage was covered. And I didn't show this part, but I placed the kimchi into kind of an airtight mason jar, and I stored it in my pantry for the next 3 days for it to ferment. During these 3 days, the bacteria on the vegetables kind of fed on the sugars that were present in the ingredients. And it's important to note that kimchi must be kept in an anaerobic environment, which just means one that has an absence of oxygen, because otherwise the production of lactic acid cannot happen. For the glucose, just means sugar, in kimchi to turn into lactic acid, glycolysis must occur, which happens in the absence of oxygen, thus explaining why kimchi must be placed in an anaerobic environment. And the glycolysis gives us pyruvic acid, which will eventually convert into lactic acid, and you can kind of see a diagram that I'm going to put on screen right there. I took a few videos after my fermentation process began, and I knew that it had begun because during the fermentation process, carbon dioxide gas is produced alongside the acid, and you can tell by my kimchi bubbling in both videos that the fermentation process has begun, because the bubbles are kind of an indication that gas is being released and is kind of locked up in that jar. Historically, fermentation was most commonly used for the preservation of food, but the chemical reaction still matters today. Not only does it improve shelf life of food, but fermented foods are also beneficial to our health. The aforementioned, quote, good bacteria breaks complex carbohydrates down into simpler ones, making digestion easier. Furthermore, this good bacteria can lower the pH of your intestines, which makes it more difficult for disease-causing bacteria to survive. Overall, fermentation is a helpful chemical reaction that can improve the health of our bodies. However, it is not unique in this sense, for there are several other chemical reactions that also have the ability to transform our foods for both our enjoyment and our health. Like and subscribe